I think that's the kind of the newest thing, to come about, from a legislative standpoint, is like, if you can't beat them in the legislature, beat them in the pocketbook, start slamming the company, start demanding that they, that they take stands on issues that they've never, stood on. And I was like, I don't think that they need to comment until either their customers or their, or their client, or their employees are asking them to make those. And then, so to me, it's like, do what you think is right or what you've continued to doing until someone actually involved with what you're doing is asking that. And right now, I don't think, for at least here in Texas, a lot of times that really is the case.
Good morning, HR. I'm Mike Coffey, and this is the podcast where I talk to business leaders about bringing people together to create value for shareholders, customers, and the community. Please follow, rate, and review Good Morning HR on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, or at goodmorninghr.com. Business leaders spend an inordinate amount of our time ensuring that our decisions and operations comply with local, state, and federal laws and regulations. But many of us have precious little understanding of how those laws and regulations actually get made and how best to influence those decision makers. To help us better understand how and why businesses should be involved in politics, I'm joined today by Cathy DeWitt. Cathy is a public policy analyst and lobbyist with the Schluter Group in Austin, Texas, where she represents business interests before the state legislators and state agencies. Her legislative expertise covers all areas of business, from labor law to healthcare to criminal justice reform. Welcome to Good Morning HR, Cathy.
Good morning, Mike. Good to be here.
So for starters, talk to me about what you actually do as a public policy analyst and lobbyist for your clients.
Well, in the simplest form, I always say the lobbyist's biggest job is to hurry up and wait. We rush to the Capitol and then we wait a long time. But for clients, what we do is make sure that when business decisions are being made at a legislative level, is that business is at the table. And not just a business in general, but the specific business, because every industry, every business is very nuanced. And so when a client hires us, it's to make sure that they're not legislated out of business. And then it has happened and can happen. And that's the biggest danger when you have a legislature that meets every 2 years and the legislators are part-timers. They have real jobs and families outside of Austin. And so you need someone there full-time who can really monitor and talk to legislative staff every single day to make sure that you're represented well.
So like Texas meets every 2 years for 5-6 months, and then sometimes 7, 8, 9 months, depending how many special sessions we have. And other states have their own rhythm, and then Congress seems to always be meeting. But if a body's not in session, if it's an off year in Texas, let's say, during the interim, does that mean that there's nothing happening and we should just wait till we see what bills get filed at the beginning of the session?
Oh, absolutely not. So right now, the House and the Senate both have interim committee hearings. And those hearings, they meet just like you would during a legislative session, but instead of bills, they're concepts and issues. And they're ones that they're more difficult. You wouldn't explain, you wouldn't be able to explain during a legislative session, or it's monitoring bills passed from the last session. It's like, did we get it right? Does this bill do more harm than good? It's really, once they pass a bill, they don't just leave it there. The legislature monitors and assesses if this bill did what it was supposed to do, because almost every bill will have sometimes unintended consequences. And so you're going to have to tweak that. So there's a huge assessment, after a bill is implemented. Also, after a bill is passed, usually then it doesn't just then there and just say it's passed. It goes into effect. There's usually a rulemaking process. So, especially like if healthcare bills, any type of insurance, anything that's very complicated, not every single thing can, you can't put every single detail in a bill. And so, because they're not experts. So they leave it and direct a regulatory agency to implement the rules and the regulations, and then the bill's fully formed. So there's a lot of monitoring of those things, and you basically have another opportunity to fight how that rule and that bill is crafted.
So during the interim between sessions, then, are you saying that like all the education or a lot of the education for the legislators is happening really when very few people are paying attention, and so they've often think they understand an issue pretty well before the session starts?
Oh, no, definitely so. I mean, if you're starting to if you're starting your first contact with the legislator at the beginning of session, you're too late. I mean, bill filing starts early November, but remember, you even have to back that out. To get a bill filed, you also it has to go through drafting. So you have to go through legislative council, which is, how every legislator will have an attorney draft their bill. So an office will have to decide the concepts of bill, bring it to legislative council to draft the bill, and then they'll be able to file it starting in November. So that's a huge process that's starting. And then the budget is so huge, the committees and subcommittees on the finance are already starting to meet as well. So you have to, if you're wanting, tax relief, a tax exemption, that work should have already started. I mean, you should have already laid the groundwork, figured out where, if you're wanting a tax exemption, where is that money going to come from? How is that going to be paid for? So I say the work almost really starts the fall after a legislative session, if you're really wanting to represent your clients in the best way.
So if I'm a business owner or a business leader and I want to reach out and have some influence on that decision making, does it make sense? I mean, we always hear from, our trade associations and groups to, we need you to call your legislator, or, or just fill out this online form and tell, to show them that you're opposed to this. In reality, how effective are different kinds of outreach to legislators?
Well, I definitely don't think patch through calls that a lot of groups do are helpful or impactful. And a patch through call is basically, you have a call center, and you'd be like, and you say, Senator so-and-so is trying to pass a bill that's going to destroy healthcare. And he's like, will you be willing to call his office and, tell him how horrible, this bill's going to be? So then they patch him through to that office, and it never fails. Half the time it's some elderly person who has no idea what they're actually calling on, and they're just like, I don't know really what I'm talking about, but we just want the killing to stop. Whatever it is, we just want it to stop. And so, so the worst thing you can do is just irritate an office with a lack of information. But if you call with no existing relationship and say, we don't like this bill, we don't think it's good for us, they will tally it and monitor. I mean, they're going to be like, if they're not a constituent, that call is void. I mean, it doesn't matter. If they're not a constituent of that district, it's a polite thank you for your call. If they don't know you, but you are a constituent, they'll keep a tally and say, yep, you had a constituent. We have 20 constituents who like this bill. We've had 2 who've called who don't like it. And then, a legislator will at least look at that and see if constituents are calling about a bill. But the most impactful thing you can do is to get to know your legislators and their staff before a legislative session, so you can be like, hey, Amanda, this is so-and-so from the district. How you doing? I was like, we've got a real big concern about a bill. That's impactful. That's what makes a difference. So just like lobbyists need to do the homework and start the work with their clients, So do business owners who just want to be engaged in the process. You got to start that early, and that's by meeting your legislator, attending their events, getting to know their staff. I mean, those they want to hear from people like that because legislators don't vote their districts; they vote their voters. And so you need to be the voter in your district who is also building that relationship with you. And so they're going to listen to the people who come to them most, who educate them the most, and those who actually go out to vote and go out to vote in their district. I mean, at the end of the day, that's who they have to listen to.
So do they actually look at that? Do they actually look, okay, this, Mike Coffey, this nut job just, reached out to us, and does he actually vote? Does he actually show up and vote? Do they really consider that? Or is it just, do they assume that if I'm showing up at these events that I'm an actual voter?
If you're showing up at an event, you're probably voting. I mean, so I think there's an assumption that's made. And I think it's more influential of like, it's the trends. You look more at the trends. It's like, after you win an election, you are looking at those numbers. You're like, what counties voted for me? What are those demographics? How many Republicans voted for me? How many Democrats? What are important, issues in those areas? Because a lot of times you can tell trends from, it's just like, well, the people in, Tom Green County were very upset that they had, closures, maybe there was a Air Force base closure or an attempt to. So you understand that, and, that when you see like a big, jump in voting from that area, it's because you used the right words, because you did your research, and that's what they care about. And so that's what you did your platform on, that at all costs they want, Air Force Base not to be closed or something like that. So, they do a lot of research, and so they know their voters already, and they know who got them to the table. And so, and legislators do respect that. I mean, they vote their districts, and when I say vote their districts, they vote the people in their districts who actually get out and vote.
So does making a political contribution to a legislator really make a difference? I mean, certainly, I guess every dollar in their war chest helps them, but is it better to contribute to an industry PAC, a political action committee, or to give directly as an individual? Or how impactful is giving, and what's the best way to do it?
I do think that industry PACs are very important. If your main objective is for your industry to be represented well in a legislative session, then you should do that. If it's about your business in your district, and you have very localized, if you have very localized things that you're wanting to do, then you should be giving an individual contribution. So it's really, if you're like looking at more of something of a statewide impact, versus, a community impact. I think that's how you should really decide those things.
Is it fair based on a politician's party affiliation? Is it wise, maybe not fair, but is it wise to assume that they're going to have a certain position related to business or healthcare or criminal justice or whatever based on their party affiliation? Or are the parties so weird now and so muddled that that you can't really make those distinctions? And so even if I think, oh, well, this guy's, this other party, and, they're traditionally not our friends, does that mean I shouldn't even reach out to them?
No, I think that's the biggest mistake that people make, is you should reach out to the other parties, even if you think that you know the answer, because, every bill, I think, a lot of things sound like great ideas. I said, but then when you get into, well, how do you pay for this? Where are you going to get the money from? And those things, that's where everything kind of crumbles. And so I think it's very important, even if you assume someone is going to be philosophically against what you're doing, there's not some middle ground. I like to tell clients, I'm like, well, let me know what you want to do. Do you want to be right, or do you want to pass a bill? I mean, those are the two nonsense. You can be right, and you can just be angry and just be like, and make a stand, maybe, argue on social media. I was like, but that's not going to get you anywhere. But if you really want to pass a bill, you can talk about policies and impact, and take the time to learn a legislator's, his priorities for his district. I mean, the first thing when I, go to a fundraiser or anything, and it's like, what do you want to pass this session? What do you want to do? It's like, what is your district really, what's really important for your district? And if you can somehow relate it, to some of their own priorities of how it might impact that, that's a way you can really, resonate. I mean, I think it's just same with sales. I mean, at the end, it's, in some ways it is a sale job, but as well as an education job. And when it comes to business, remember, we talk about it because what everyone in Texas wants to create more good paying jobs in Texas. That's what we want. Who's against that? And so you make sure that there's these common, common ground, and there certainly is for business. I mean, everyone wants to support, as you and I remember, Bill Hammond used to always talk about Ed's welding shop, and that was his. And I was actually at an event last Thursday, and it was a Democrat from your area, and he's like, that used to drive me crazy, but he's like, who I really relate to? Ed. He goes, I want to meet that guy because he works really hard.
Yeah. Steal Bill Hammond's story and tell that.
So Bill Hammond used to be the president of the Texas Association of Business, which, is a great organization everyone should be a part of. But
the Texas State Chamber of Commerce.
Right. And he was really smart because the one thing he understands is that everyone loves a small business. And so Bill Hammond, basically in every piece of testimony that he ever testified, it didn't matter if it was a healthcare bill, an employment law bill, he talked about Ed from Ed's Welding Shop. Ed's Welding Shop is not an actual business. We've looked. There is no Ed's Welding Shop. We were hoping that there was. But what Ed symbolized is something that every legislator could relate to. And Bill Hammond knew that. And so everything is piece. It's a prime example of finding common ground and then launching off instead of just going in there. How dare you work on this? How dare you do these things? As you really talk about, the common goals of like, what's important to all of us. I was like, what? We want our kids to be well educated. We want them to, go off to college. We want Ed, even though, his profit margins are small, that he can send his kids to a good college and that he can dance at his daughter's wedding and actually pay for the wedding and not be in debt for the rest of the year. And him and the wife can get the kids off and they can, support themselves and they can go on that cruise that they finally wanted to go on. And all of a sudden, it's not about the power of business, but it's about every individual. And that has always kind of stuck with me as a lobbyist, because it's not a story. It's not an idea. It's what we're all striving for here in Texas. And I think that when we make it about people instead of politics, that's what, is really going to resonate.
Yeah, I think at least in some parts of our society, there's this idea that politics, that business owns politics, and we get whatever we want as whatever business asks for. The politicians just give it to us. But I mean, I know a lot of business owners and business leaders who are always, feel at risk from either a state agency or some bill or some legislator's idea. And I don't, when I advocate at the legislature, I'm advocating on behalf of, a couple hundred clients of my own who we try to serve. And I need the laws to support our ability to serve them. My own employees, make sure there's, food on their tables, after this bill is passed or doesn't pass. And also for my community. I mean, I don't think any of us can have a a healthy community without business. And I think the idea of these big corporations running everything, certainly they've got money and they probably get a little bit more platform. But certainly in the work we've done together through the Texas Association of Business and other efforts, I've seen plenty of business, small businesses, medium-sized businesses really take the lead on issues. So these events that we should attend to get to know our legislator. Are these all necessarily fundraisers, or are there other kinds of events where we can meet them without having our name on their donor rolls?
Oh, no, absolutely. I mean, you're going to see a legislator at every local chamber event. You're gonna see them at openings of businesses and other things. And honestly, if you reach out and invite a legislator to something, he's probably going to show up. If given enough time, if there's something that's just like, oh yeah, there's a lot of different things that they will attend, and just of trying to organize other events, a legislator is going to cancel someone else if because constituent trumps anything else happening, unless it's really physically I'm at a committee hearing. And so constituents have a lot of power to get involved, and you just have to make those little efforts, whether you want it to be through your local chamber or any other organization that you're active in. That most likely that legislator is also going to be active in that organization. And so it doesn't have to be just a fundraiser. And you can call his district office and just say, hey, I'd love to talk to him. I mean, they'll totally do that.
If they pawn you off on their staff, is that a slight, or is that the same as helping educate the legislator?
No, it's not a slight. I think that it's just as important to get to know staff. And in fact, sometimes people kind of overlook staff. My first year lobbying, I overlooked staff for a brief moment until I was in my place. And I was so excited because a legislator actually called me into his office, and I just kind of walk right in there, barely talk to staff. And the chief of staff, I saw him at an event the next day, and he basically, I don't want to say on this podcast what he called me, but it was not it wasn't one of the nicest things. And what I realized is, like, so much focusing on talking to the legislator, I basically alienated the people who would actually be, booking, booking appointments, deciding on legislation. And so I definitely focus more on staff and respect the process of talking to, even if I'm friends with a legislator, I make sure if I will text them if I have something I'm like, hey, how are you? But if I have a legislative issue to talk to them, I will go through their staff and make that appointment. So one, that they're in the loop, it never appears that they're going outside, because they're just an extension, they're an extension of the legislator. Again, a legislator has a full-time job, and he's trying to do that job when he's not in session. So a staffer their staffers are full-time. So they're the people, they're depending on staffers to really tell them what they should be doing. So they should not be overlooked, nor should you feel slighted, even though both are important to know.
And you mentioned a couple of times that these legislators have full-time jobs. And what you're talking about is they've got a job that's actually paying their bills, because at least in Texas, right, and I think in most other places, they're not getting rich being legislators. What does a legislator in Texas typically make? How does that work?
What's a per diem? So, I mean, during session, I think it's $300 a day. If they now so it's definitely a labor of love. It's going to take a special occupation. He'll be able to do that. A lot of the doctors almost take that are legislators, honestly have to take, small leaves of absence, from their practices. it's very hard, and it takes commitment, from these guys to do that. So you also have to remember that when you're talking about business issues, remember these guys are all small business owners too, because usually you're going to have to be an owner. You're not going to be working at a call center because there's no way. There's no way that you're going to be able to get off of work to come to the Texas legislature, for 6 months. So usually you're in a position of either ownership, or you're an attorney who is self-employed. So you're really kind of talking when you're trying to sell your issues. You're talking to someone who understands, and has signed both sides of a paycheck. So, they get the business nuances. So you just have to, but remember, every single business is hitting them, with different things. And so so the question is how do we talk above the noise of all of the business issues? Because it's very overwhelming. I mean, and how do you decide what's important, what's not? And I think that's where the relationship part, really comes in, them knowing their districts. So employment law, very important to you, and so, the first thing I do for, my clients is, let's see who is on the committee, that does employment law, like House Business and Industry. And then I would hope that there is someone on House Business Industry that's in your district, and that's the first thing that I'd be like, is develop that relationship, educate them on the issues, because they will take time for a constituent who will actually educate them on. They'll appreciate that, and especially if they're on a committee that works on those issues.
And let's take a quick break. Good Morning HR is brought to you by Imperative, premium background checks with fast and friendly service. If you're an HRCI or SHRM certified professional, this episode of Good Morning HR has been pre-approved for 1/2 hour of recertification credit. To obtain the recertification information, visit goodmorninghr.com and click on Research Credits. Then select episode 45 and enter the keyword DeWitt. That's DEWITT. And if you're looking for even more recertification credit, check out the webinars page at imperativeinfo.com. I have 10 hours of recorded webinars, each approved for an hour of recertification credit by both HRCI and SHRM. 3 are even approved for HRCI business credit, and 1 qualifies for ethics credit. You can access all of these webinars for free at imperativeinfo.com. And now back to my conversation with Cathy DeWitt. So, is it true that once the legislative session starts, there's more effort put into killing bills than passing bills by the advocacy, part of the market?
No, actually, it's not true. But what is true, it's partly true. What is a fact is the legislature is set up for bills to die. I mean, that its intent, just by the way of process, is supposed to weed out and kill bills. So a lot of times at the beginning of session, there'd be a client, oh my God, this is the worst bill. I'm like, it has a high number. It's not an actual leg council draft. I said, the odds of something like that, so you should just wait and see. And a lot of times there's an incredible amount of work that can be done by just waiting in the session, because the system itself is set up to kill things. So if you have to pass a bill, that's going to be your hardest thing. It's like, because you already have the whole system against you. So you really have to set yourself apart to pass a bill.
What do you mean by it's got a high bill number, or it's drafted by leg committee versus what's the alternative to that?
Well, if there's a bill that has a low bill number, that it was, it already went through the legislative council by attorneys to be drafted. A lot of work already went into that bill. So that it means something to someone. Someone's going to work
That
really
means it
hard
was
on this bill.
that means it was filed early. Is that what it is? I mean, is the first bill filed bill number one, the second bill filed by some
No.
rando legislator bill two, or how do those numbers happen?
Well, no, they save a certain number of bills for the real critical bills. So the tax bill is going to be a low number. So during last session, a lot of the energy, electricity bills, those would be low numbers. So it would go on whatever the lieutenant governors and the speakers' bill priorities. Those are going to get the lowest numbers. Then what happens after that? So I think bill filing starts, I think November 9th. Then there are certain, like there's a Senate office who has their staffers like basically get in line 6 hours before you can start bill filing to make sure that they get the lower numbers. A lower number does indicate you're much more serious about this issue. So say someone files a bill on the last day of session and the last day of bill filing in its bill 4,520, and you can also tell that it didn't go through the legislative council draft, that someone just thought of a bill just right now. I mean, they didn't do the preparation work, that they basically they probably were seeing on TV. They're like, are we in session now? Maybe we should hire someone and get a bill drafted on a really complex topic. And so they hire a lobby firm, and a lobby firm's like, oh my, well, this is the job to do. So you have to first just get it, make sure that there's a bill. So to at least keep the topic moving, it's like you go ahead and ask a legislator, say, I'm so sorry. Can you please just file this bill? And then we'll work on this later. And so when you're looking at all these bills, those are the last ones you're going to worry about. You're going to worry about, this whole other section. Now, every once in a while, there will be one of those really late bills that'll pop up and then become very dangerous. That happened to me 2 sessions ago. And an office started, this horrible bill started moving. And so it's the first time I come into the office and they're like, wait, well, why have you never come in here? And I'm like, well, because it had a high number and it wasn't even a legislative council draft. I assume you just did it as a favor for someone. I didn't think you were actually going to move it. And but so it's not always typical. It's not always typical, but usually, you don't think of those bigger numbers until much later in the session or if they start moving.
So this is the French goodbye. We're almost out of time, but I'm going to ask this big question. It may take us more time, but so businesses are getting more and more market pressure and pressure from employee groups to take public policy positions. The Edelman Trust Survey says that of all the leaders in society, my CEO is the most trusted of over media, my politicians, even clergy, and more people are looking to business leaders and businesses to help shape and public policy and solve public issues. Certainly, I think there's in a lot of corners a lot more trust and faith in business to solve a lot of problems than there is relying straight on government. But we've seen when that pressure happens, other groups, suddenly respond negatively to that towards that business. We've seen in Florida, we're seeing the executive in Florida taking issues against Disney for their opposition to some bills. So if I'm a business leader and I'm maybe I feel this is the right thing to do, and maybe I'm getting pressure from some stakeholders to take a position, what should my considerations be as I try to figure out, how far is too far, and dare I do this? How public should I be? How do I evaluate that stuff?
Well, I think you have to first assess where's the pressure coming from. A lot of times I know they say it's employees and other things, but usually there's some third-party group, not even from Texas, who's established a grassroots campaign to make demands of certain companies, to make demands of certain companies. And I mean, if that's the case, I'm like, I don't. I was like, don't. Yeah, I said, yeah, don't buy those tactics. I mean, I said, who you should be listening to are your state leaders, your employees, and and the people who are that you work with in your district. And I said, and all of those other pressures, I think more are just based on campaigns because they've lost in a legislative arena. I think that's the kind of the newest thing, to come about, from a legislative standpoint, is like, if you can't beat them in the legislature, beat them in the pocketbook. Start slamming the company, start demanding that they, that they take stands on issues that they've never stood on. And I was like, I don't think that they need to comment until either their customers or their or their client, or their employees are asking them to make those. And then, so to me, it's like, do what you think is right or what you've continued to doing until someone actually involved with what you're doing is asking that. And right now, I don't think, for at least here in Texas, a lot of times that really is the case. It's a campaign tactic, kind of. I don't know if you remember when the NRA was basically doing billboards, of oil and gas companies, not really in Texas, but in other states, over gun laws. And so, to me, that's a campaign tactic. I mean, and more than anything. And so, I think it would do a company very bad if they know that campaign tactics work, as like you'll always be making business decisions for political reasons. And I don't think that's a very impactful way to be a part of Texas.
Yeah, there's a reason we don't negotiate with terrorists, right? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, exactly. I mean, and you know, and as a business lobbyist, I also, it's like, I don't negotiate. I don't make bad bills better. I said, that's not my job. I mean, that's not what my clients want, just to be liked. I said, we're here to make good policy. I mean, we're not here to make friends. I said, we want to be respected. We want to, and be heard. But, at the end of the day, we have to, represent our clients the best way that we can.
So the idea that, this is just a bad bill, but there's some line where we just say we're not compromising on this bill, just because any compromise is going to take us away from where we think, this law or this lack of a law or this regulation needs to be. And so is compromise often a bad thing when it comes to legislation, or where does that fall? Where's that line?
Well, I think compromise is what you do when you know you're about to lose. I mean, I think,
I got my new T-shirt. I'm going to get that one done. Yeah.
But yeah. I mean, if you're starting out, if you're starting out ready to compromise with people, then to me, that's what tells you is like, I know I'm not going to be able to do this. And I feel like that'd be like going to a car dealership and already telling them, I was like, here's my bottom line, but by the way, I'm going to be able to go up $15,000 more. I mean, that's how I see it. I mean, so you go in saying firm, but if they, but I think that's why, stakeholder meetings are important, because you can express, exactly what you need. You can express how a bill impacts your industry. And I think it's a legislator's job then to take all of that information and to craft a bill, doing exactly what he wants to do, but to eliminate the unintended consequences. And that's really the job of, business lobbyists or any other advocate, is like, did you mean to do this? Because I think when there was bills on service animals, I was like, did you mean that someone to have a service lizard? Is that what you really wanted, to have a service iguana, in your store? So, or a service Komodo dragon as you're going through shopping at Bed Bath and Beyond, and so those are the things that if those bills pass, it's probably because someone hasn't done their job of laying out it's like, I don't think you really mean to do this. So I think that there's compromise, and then there's tweaking a bill to make sure it doesn't hurt another industry. So I don't think everyone really, I don't think that's everyone's philosophy, but it's mine.
Okay. Last question. Is Twitter a real thing? Do legislators even care what the Twitter mob says?
I mean, to some extent. I mean, I think now I think it's like it's where everyone goes to share their feelings, apparently, without filter. I mean, but yes, to some extent, but in a different way. I mean, I think everyone sees it through a lens of what it is, of just any social media. I kind of equate it to, have you ever seen it when you're like, these people are so happy on Facebook? I'm like, they're exhausting. How can someone be this happy? And, it's just like, and then you find out like they're getting divorced, like, 6 months later. And so I think as long as
So you think some of those people on Twitter are actually happy at some point in their life? Because they all seem angry to me.
No, probably not.
Yeah.
No, well, and as we get older, I went to acupuncture the other day, and this, Dr. Shen says, he takes my pulse, and he's like, he goes, "You're very angry on the inside." I was like, if you think you're going to be some fortune teller, I was like, I'm a 50-year-old menopausal woman. Of course, I'm angry inside. You're going to need to, you're going to need to give me some more information of why I think you're brilliant. But so I think, when you're
going to need a bigger needle, buddy.
I said, you're going to need a bigger needle, and I need you to tell me something I don't know. I mean, that's really where we're at right now. He's like, oh, okay. Now he does double sessions for me because he's scared of me. But I think as long as I think as social media or Twitter or anything, as long as I think it's helpful. I think you can find out some really good information, and legislators do look at it. But I think most people are smart enough to look at it through a lens of more entertainment, and then sometimes with a nugget of of value. And I mean, usually, I don't know about you, but I just watch it for the fights of I just like to see who's bickering. So it's unfortunate that's what it's turned into, but I mean, that's just where we are today in our culture.
That's it. And it kind of goes back to what we started with. It's probably more effective to know your legislator, know their staff, have a relationship, so you can have an actual conversation before something becomes an issue that's Twitter worthy.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, it also goes back to, I mean, I think, if you want to advocate on Twitter, that's more about being right than wanting to pass good policy. And so I think that's what it's created. So it just creates a lot of noise. But that's what politics is now, in some ways. And so God bless the legislators that have to, dig themselves around the noise to really, decide policy matters. Because I say, politics is about what people want to hear, and policy is the real truth. I mean, it's just.
Let me repeat that. Okay, politics is about what people want to hear, and policy is about what's.
Policy is the truth. And I mean, if you really want to know who a legislator is, look at his bills.
Okay.
Look at what his bills say. I mean, and the politics is. It's been a long time, but almost a lot of state legislators won because they're like, we're going to fight Obamacare, and everyone was so scared about Obamacare. Guess what? Texas legislature does nothing. Texas legislature does nothing about Obamacare, but That's what they want to hear. That's what resonated with them. That's what got them out to vote.
Right. I mean, and we've seen it with bathroom bills and the Florida Don't Say Gay bill, all these, and on the left, all kinds of, social issues that really aren't going to be decided at the local level or at the state level. And, but like you say, it gets people fired up and gets them to show up.
Right. And that's the politics part of it. And so when you get to a legislative session, there's definitely the noise of politics, but everyone truly is there, hopefully, to do the job of policy. And then, so at the end of the day, you look at the policy that was created, and that's why I think holding legislators accountable. I mean, I think that's the other part we didn't talk about here, that businesses should be doing, is holding legislators accountable for their business votes.
How would you do that?
Well, I think that's where associations come in. Um, you know, uh, is that make sure that they do voting records. Don't give out awards just because you want to create a relationship. You give out awards because they voted for business. Because a lot of times at the end of legislature, what you'll see is a swap of votes. I mean, because they're like, my district really wants this bill to pass. They're like, yeah, but I want this bill to pass. And they're like, okay, well, I'll vote for this bill if you vote for this bill, but you need to kill this bill. And so at the end, it's very important that legislators know, yeah, I can't change my vote on this because there's going to be a business group and they're going to have my score, and I think this is going to be on there. So I'm not going to be able to swap that one because I know I'm going to be held accountable to that. And so it's that type of pressure that they might still do the same thing, but knowing that there's pressure, that someone's watching and that someone cares, I it will make it. It makes a difference, especially in those last days where bills are being amended to other bills. It's a crazy time of session that you have to really be watching for, and so knowing that they're going to be accountable can kind of sometimes change the direction, and they'll not swap those votes. Because it's happened to me. I think SB 14 on the preemption bill, on for the cities that I know that you've worked on with some groups as well. That bill's died the last day like 10 times now, and it was a political swap. At the end of the day, it's not because if it had gotten to the floor and it was fully voted on, it would have passed.
Yeah, if you want to see something, if you want to make sure something dies in calendar committee, get me behind it, because every time I get behind anything really passionately, it ends up dying in calendar at the very end of session.
Well, I always joke too. It's like sometimes I said, if your client wants a bill's passed, make sure I'm on the other side. So because sometimes, especially with those really hard bills, you're like, what is it opposite day? But well, I just think you're for very, the bills that you've, been supporting are really hard bills. And it's like, and they do get caught up because I think those bills in the last part of session are really, it's all about politics then. So even more important to businesses, get your bill done early so it doesn't become a casualty of the political plays at the end of session.
There you go. And well, that's all the time we have today. Thank you for joining me today, Cathy.
Thanks, Mike.
And thank you for listening. You can find previous episodes, show notes, and contact info for our guests at goodmorninghr.com or on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube. And don't forget to follow us wherever you get your podcasts. Rob Upchurch is our technical producer, and I'm Mike Coffey. As always, don't hesitate to reach out if I can be of service to you personally or professionally. I'll see you next week, and until then, be well, do good, and keep your chin up.